Chapter 7 of The Ghost of Guir House. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Melin. The Ghost of Guir House by Charles Willing Beale. Chapter 7. It was not until Mr. Henley had made another and longer visit to the dark room that he became convinced beyond all doubt that the work of sealing up the place had been done from within, and that there was, and had been, no other outlet but that through which he had entered. To suppose that the main wall of the house had been closed in at a later period would be preposterous, and for manifest reasons. His examination of the room's interior had been most thorough and exhaustive. The place was smoothly plastered upon the inside, and even the mason's trowel had been found upon the floor within, so that it became at once evident that those who had done the work had been self-immured. Although the reason for such an act was utterly beyond his comprehension, Paul felt a certain satisfaction in having reached this conclusion, as it showed the impossibility of Dorothy's being in any way implicated in the affair. It seemed even possible that she was ignorant of it. But this discovery in no wise lessened the mystery, it rather increased it. A few evenings after Paul's decision regarding the self-immurement of those discovered in the vault, he and Ah Ben were again enjoying their pipes by the great fireplace in the hall. The elder man was generally disposed to conversation at this hour, and after Dorothy had retired, Paul alluded to the strange scene he had witnessed through the chimney, and expressed a desire to learn something of occultism. Taking his long-stemmed pipe from his lips, the old man gazed earnestly into the fire. He seemed to be thinking of what to say, and to be drawing inspiration from the glowing embers and dancing flames before him. At last he spoke. "Occultism, Mr. Henley, is difficult, nay, almost impossible, to explain to a layman, or if explained, remains incomprehensible, and yet a child may acquire its secrets by its individual efforts. Spiritual power comes to those who seek it in proper mood, but, injudiciously exercised, may cause insanity." "Nevertheless," urged Paul, "if you won't consider me a trifler, I should like to see a further manifestation of the power." Ah Ben looked at him compassionately. "Pardon me, Mr. Henley," he said, "but it is not always well to gratify our curiosity upon such a subject. But if you seriously wish it, and can believe in me as an honest and honorable custodian of the power, and will prepare yourself for a serious mental shock, I will show you something." "Before proceeding," said Paul, "I should like to ask you a question. Was the room I saw through the chimney a real room? I mean, had it any material existence upon earth?" "Most assuredly. It was a scene in my early childhood, and originated in the valley of the Jhelum in the Punjab. The officer and lady were my parents. It was the last time I ever saw them. I was the boy." "May I ask how it is possible to reproduce a scene so long past out of existence, and which took place so many thousand miles away?" "Easily told, but not so easily understood by one whose mind has never been trained to think in these occult channels," answered the elder man. "For to understand the thing at all, you must first divest your mind of time and space as outside entities, for these are in reality but modes of thought, and have only such value as we give them. India, doubtless, seems very far to you, but to one whose powers of will have been sufficiently developed, it is no farther than the wall of this room. So it is with time. How can we see that which no longer exists? But a little reflection will show us that even on the physical plane we see that which does not exist every day of our lives. Look at the stars. The light by which some of them are recognized has been millions of years in transit, so that we do not behold them as they are tonight, but as they were at that remote period of time. Meanwhile they may have been wrecked and scattered in meteoric dust." "But that is hardly an explanation of the scene referred to," answered Paul. "Whenever I direct my eyes in the right quarter, the stars are visible; whether they be actually there or not, they are there to me. But not so with the vision of the room. In my normal condition there is no room there, while in my normal condition the stars are always there." "True, and because your normal condition is sympathetically attuned to the vibrations of starlight. Your consciousness is located in your brain, and so long as those vibrations continue to strike with sufficient force upon the optic nerve, you will be conscious of the light. But suppose the machinery of your body were finer; suppose your senses were absolutely in accord with those vibratory movements, instead of only partially so, do you not know that the starlight would reveal far more than it now does? Then you would see not only the light, but the scenes that are carried in the light, but which by reason of their obtuseness cannot penetrate your senses. Were this improvement in men really achieved, our conceptions of time and space would be modified, and the condition of other worlds as plainly seen as our own." "Yes," said Paul, determined to follow up the original question. "But what of a scene that occurred in this world some years ago, and whose light vibrations would require but the fraction of a second to reach our point of consciousness, no matter where situated on earth, and which vibrations have long since passed beyond the reach of man and been lost in infinite space?" "Nothing is ever lost, and infinite space is but a phase of infinite mind. All that is necessary to review such a picture is to change our point of consciousness from the brain to a point in space or mind, where the vibratory movement is still in progress. In other words, to overtake the scene by transposing our consciousness. Granted these powers, which are born of the soul, and we may behold any event in history with the clearness of its original force. Man is mind, and mind is one, but all mind is not self-conscious. The consciousness of mind is in spots, as it were, and here its consciousness is fixed in a spot called brain, where with most men it remains until the will, or some abnormal condition or the event called death, liberates it from its prison. You believe that with your God the scenes of yesterday, today, and forever are alike visible?" "Even admitting all that you say," answered Paul, "I cannot see how it was that I, who have no such power, could see clearly an event in your life." "Again, the power of sympathetic vibration. The scene was reflected from my mind to yours." "But you just now said that there was but one mind." "Perhaps then it would be more correct to say, from my point of consciousness to yours, or, to be still more accurate, to say that the intensity of my thoughts struck a sympathetic chord in yours, and vibrated through you as one consciousness. Without undue familiarity, Mr. Henley, I have found in you a responsive temperament. There are few men I cannot influence, and with some the effort is trifling." Paul was interested, and sat quietly reflecting upon what he had heard. Naturally the ideas were not so clear as they would have been had he given more thought to the conditions of spirituality, which for so many years had been a part of Ah Ben's existence, and which state was as familiar to him as the body in which he appeared. Time and reflection alone, as this strange man had declared, could bring one to comprehend and realize a condition of existence so totally differing from that of our material plane. The inability of language to express that of which we have no parallel, and of which we cannot conceive, is a grave obstacle to our understanding, but the man was never ready to exert himself to make the matter clear when he found his listener interested. "If I am not tiring you," continued Paul, "I should like to call your attention to another point. You said that nothing was absolute, that all was relative, and yet when it comes to fixed measures, I think you must admit that this is not so. For example, a mile is a mile, and a mile must always be a mile under every conceivable condition. Am I not right?" "At first thought it would seem so," answered Ah Ben. "A mile certainly appears to be an absolute unchanging quantity of so many feet, which must always and under every circumstance affect us in the same way, and yet a little reflection will show that this cannot be so, and that a mile, after all, is only fixed so long as our mind is fixed. In other words, it is a mental conception, and relative to other mental conceptions. Let us, for example, suppose that the world and all its contents, and, in fact, the entire universe, were exactly twice as large as it is. The mile would then be twice as long as it is now, and that which we now call a mile would only make the impression of half as much distance as it now does. And so with all material conditions. I say material, for in the spiritual life we see these things more truly as they are, and not as they appear. There is but one class of facts which is absolute. I speak of the emotions. These are the realities of life, the soul qualities. Could we measure love, hate, or happiness, the standard would be fixed. "Do not forget your promise to show me something more of your power in the region of occultism," said Henley, "for I am greatly interested." "I will keep my word, but I warn you to prepare for a shock." "I am ready, and should like nothing better than to witness an example of your greatest power." The old man looked solemn, and then slowly answered, "You shall be gratified. It is now past midnight. Dorothy is asleep, and it is a fitting time. If you will follow me to my own room, I will show you a mystery." For a moment Paul hesitated. The thought of following this strange man at such an hour into the realm of the unknown, to investigate the supernatural, was uncanny, and he half wished he had not made the request. He knew the man to be no trifler. That which he promised, he would surely perform. Then, procuring a candle, Ah Ben led the way. They walked along the narrow passage at the rear, Ah Ben stopping to close the door quietly behind them. They then mounted a still narrower stairway at the back, Paul following closely. Presently they entered a passage which led in the opposite direction from Henley's bedchamber, and then, turning sharply to the right, found a narrow hallway which terminated in a door. Here the men stopped. "I am going to take you into my sanctum, and you must not be surprised if you find things different from the ordinary. The circumstances of my life have set me apart from most men, and if my surroundings are at variance with theirs, you must set it down to these facts." Here he opened the door. The room was lighted with the same lamp that Paul had seen through the chimney. There were odd-looking things, such as a skeleton with artificial eyes, a glass manikin with a reddish fluid that meandered through his body in thread-like streams, a horoscope and a globe, suspended from the ceiling, with the signs of the zodiac. Various old parchments, covered with quaint cabalistic figures, were tacked against the walls. In a cabinet, embellished with hieroglyphics, stood another human form, a mummy wonderfully preserved. "Here we are alone," said Ah Ben. "It is the quietest hour of the night, and therefore we are least apt to be disturbed." "And what do you propose?" asked Paul with a misgiving he was loath to admit. "Whatever you may desire, Mr. Henley; for you must know that which is born of spirit is not subject to the restrictions of matter. But remember that all is natural; there is no supernatural, and therefore no cause for alarm." Ah Ben led the way to the window, and having drawn aside the curtain, threw up the sash. To Henley's amazement, they walked directly through the open casement and found themselves upon a broad stone terrace in the glaring light of day. Beneath them lay a city of marvelous beauty, whose streets were lined with palaces, surrounded by their own parks, and whose inhabitants were walking in and about the shaded thoroughfares, or resting in the public seats behind them. The change was so sudden, so bewildering, that Paul drew back, his hand pressed against his head. Whereupon Ah Ben took him by the arm and said, "There is nothing here to alarm you. Come, let us descend these steps, and walk through the town." The voice and touch of the man reassured him. Walking down the broad stone steps, they found themselves in a noble avenue lined with trees and adorned with sparkling fountains. Everywhere the people looked happy. There was neither hurry nor effort, but the grandest monuments to human action were visible upon every hand. Such palaces of dazzling marble, such lace-like carvings in stone, such noble terraces and gardens, and open to all the world alike. "See," said Ah Ben, "the people here are of one mind. There is no wrangling or struggling for place. These palaces are the property of the public, and why should they not be, since man's unity is understood? Exclusiveness is the result of ignorance, but privacy and seclusion may even be better enjoyed in the conditions prevailing here than in our own state of existence, and because of the unlimited power and material to draw upon. No man can crowd another after he has come to realize that all is mind, and that mind is infinite." "But where is Guir House and the estate?" inquired Paul, feeling as if the whole thing were an incomprehensible illusion. "They have not been disturbed," the old man answered. "They are where they always were, in the minds of those who perceive them, and upon whose plane they exist." "It is too utterly bewildering. These things appear as real as any I ever saw." "Appear? They are as real. Let us go into one of these bazaars, and see what the people are doing." They turned through an open doorway resplendent with burnished metal and sculpture to where great corridors, halls and galleries, stocked with properties and merchandise of every description, were crowded with people. No one was in attendance, and those who came and went carried with them what they pleased. No money was passed, nor did compensation of any kind seem forthcoming. "If anything strikes your fancy, take it," said Ah Ben. "All things here are free, and yet everything is paid for." Paul asked for an explanation, which Ah Ben gave as follows. "The city before you is located in the year 3000, more than 1,000 years in advance of our time. It is called Levachan, and will appear upon earth about 700 years hence, in about 400 years from which time it will attain the size and splendor you now behold. We here see it in its spiritual state, which precedes and follows all material forms. It will begin its descent into matter, through the minds of physical man, about the time I have mentioned, It is merely a type of a class toward which we are tending, and I show it to you that you may see the vast strides we shall have made by that time. In the state of society in which we find ourselves, compensation is made by a system of absolute freedom in exchange. Here, if a man wants a coat, he takes it, and the owner reimburses himself from the great reservoir of the world's goods, which is open to all men as integral parts of a unit. What check have you upon the unreasoning rapacity of a thief, who will take 10 times as much as he requires? The system operates directly against the development of that trait. Here men are only too anxious to have their goods admired and taken, for being certain of their own maintenance, they feel a pride in contributing to that of others, and there is no temptation to take that which cannot be kept, since his neighbor has equal right to take from him an idle surplus. Here the laws are the reverse of ours, for here a man is encouraged in the taking, but never in the holding. Wealth is measured by what a man disperses, hence all are anxious to part with their individual property for the advancement of the commonwealth, knowing that the one can only thrive when the many are prosperous. They continued their walk amid the marvelous wealth that surrounded them. There were fabrics of untold value, jewels of indescribable splendor, men, women, and children with strangely eager faces. They seated themselves upon revolving chairs in the midst of a great space to watch the glittering show. "But tell me what it all means," inquired Paul. "I feel as if it were a dream, and yet I am absolutely certain that it is not." "You are right, it is not a dream. Levachan is as real as New York, Boston, or Chicago, although invisible to men of earth. Its inhabitants are as conscious of their existence as you and I are of ours. They are quite as alive to their history and probable destiny as any well-educated citizen of America or Europe." "But where is Guir House and all it contained?" repeated Henley, unable to understand. "Nothing has been changed by this any more than if you were in your bed dreaming it all. But to you it is incomprehensible, as I told you it would be, because your mind has never been trained to think in these realms." "No," answered Paul, turning uneasily in his chair, dazed by the marvelous pageant that moved constantly about them. "No, I admit that it has not, and that the whole thing is utterly beyond me. And this, none the less, because I am aware that one of the fundamental facts of nature is that two things cannot occupy the same place at the same time. My previous education, instead of helping me, makes the situation more difficult. The Guir estate and this city cannot both be here at once, of that I am sure." "That is a mere assumption on the part of materialists," answered Ah Ben. "Not only two things, but 10,000,000 things, can occupy the same space at the same time. For what is space? And what is time? They are mental conditions, as are all the phenomena of nature. Even your scientist will tell you that the infinite ether penetrates all substances, and that cast steel or a diamond contains as much of this mysterious element as any other space of equal size. The varying vibrations of this ether, or universal akasa, make the world and all that is in it, and these vibrations are interpenetrable and non-obstructive. Even on the material plane we see how the vibrations of light and heat penetrate those of visible and tangible substance, and how, in your more recent discoveries, light rays penetrate solid metals formerly called opaque. When I say that these vibrations are interpenetrable and non-obstructive, the statement must be taken as approximating the truth, and not as a finality, independent of all conditions, for by the power of the will, or as a result of mental habit, a man may either exclude or admit to his consciousness the thought vibrations of others. But you may set it down as a fundamental fact that there is nothing or no condition of which the mind can conceive that may not become an objective reality, which is the creative faculty in all of us. This city is here to us just as really and actually as were the trees of Guir Forest a short time ago. By opening our inward sight, and putting ourselves in accord with an other vibratory plane of existence, we are in full rapport with a condition that makes no impression upon the members of the sleeping world not so impressed. But we left the house at midnight, and here we are in the broad light of day. Do you mean to tell me that the mind controls the sun itself? The thing is so astounding that I feel as if I were losing my reason. And did I not tell you that it was unwise to gratify curiosity in this realm when unprepared by a long course of training? But let me quote you a few words from one of our greatest philosophers. And Ah Ben quoted the following from Franz Hartmann's Magic, White and Black. Visible man is not all there is of man, but is surrounded by an invisible mental atmosphere, comparable to the pulp surrounding the seed in a fruit. But this light, or atmosphere, or pulp, is the mind of man, an organized ocean of spiritual substance, wherein all things exist. If man were conscious of his own greatness, he would know that within himself exist the sun and the moon and the starry sky and every object in space, because his true self is God, and God is without limits. "These thoughts are utterly beyond me," said Paul uneasily. "As I told you they would be," replied Ah Ben, turning his chair and looking at his pupil with a kindly expression. And then with his usual earnestness he added, "But they will not be so always." "And you tell me that these things are actually as real as the furniture in Guir House?" inquired Henley. "Quite," answered the guide. "Test them for yourself. Do you not see this magnificent dome above our heads, supported upon these wonderful pillars? Try them, touch them, strike them with your hand. Are they not solid? Apply every test in your power to their reality. They will not fail you in one. And let me ask, what further evidence have you of the furniture of which you speak? Thought is real, and the man who can hold to his thought long enough endows it with objectivity." "It is a mystery involving mysteries," sighed Paul, "and I could never even ask the questions that are crowding into my mind." "So it is with all life," the old man replied thoughtfully, pressing his hand against his forehead as he gazed into the brilliant scene without seeming to look at anything especial. "And so it is with all life," he repeated in a minute. "It is a mystery involving mysteries. What are dreams? Give them a little more intensity, as in the case of the somnambule or clairvoyant, and they are real. The trouble is, Mr. Henley, that few of us ever come to realize that life itself is a dream, and when science recognizes that fact, many of the difficulties she now encounters will vanish. Let me repeat a few lines from the Song Celestial, or Bhagavad Gita. Never the spirit was born. The spirit shall cease to be never. Never was time it was not. End and beginning are dreams. Birthless and deathless and changeless remaineth the spirit forever. Death has not touched it at all, dead though the house of it seems. These thoughts are better understood in the East," continued Ah Ben, where the people give less time to religion and more to the philosophy of life. And what are dreams but a part of our inner existence? None the less mysterious because we are so familiar with them. There are numerous authenticated records of dreams that have carried a man through an apparently long life, but which have really occupied less than a second of time, as counted with us, through all the minutiae and details of youth, courtship, marriage, a military career, war with all its horrors, the details of the last battle where death was inevitable, and where the last shot was fired and heard that brought the great change, of awakening, and the sudden perception that the entire phantasmagoria had been caused by the slamming of the door, which the exhausted sleeper had only that second opened as he dropped into a chair beside it. The facts in this case are proven, no perceptible time having elapsed. Time is nothing. Time is only what we make it. An hour in a dungeon might be an eternity, while 1,000,000 years in the Levachan of the Hindu would seem but a summer's day. End of chapter 7. Recording by Roger Melin.